It is one of the most operationally complex jobs on the planet. The presidency requires a massive, moving logistical footprint to project power globally. For managing that immense structure, the constitutional compensation is strictly defined by Congress. Currently, the president earns a flat salary of $400,000 a year, followed by a lifetime pension of $199,700 annually after leaving office. The position also includes specific logistical perks provided entirely for national security. The president travels with a dedicated fleet of helicopters and armored cars, and the customized Boeing 747 known as Air Force One. Yet there is a hard line between public duty and private luxury. Despite living in an iconic mansion with a full domestic staff, the president's family must pay out of pocket for their own groceries, dry cleaning, and personal parties. These high-level security measures and perks support a role that remains a structured, strictly bounded government job. The boundaries of the job also extend to time. George Washington set a powerful early precedent by stepping away after 2 four-year terms, proving that a peaceful transfer of democratic power could actually work. That informal rule held for 150 years. Then, to navigate the overlapping crises of the Great Depression and World War II, voters kept the same leader in the White House, electing Franklin D. Roosevelt 4 separate times. Concerned by the prospect of unchecked executive control, Congress passed the 22nd Amendment in 1951, capping all future presidents at 2 terms. There is one mathematical exception. If a vice president takes over and serves 2 years or less, they can still run for 2 full terms. This creates an absolute legal maximum of 10 years in office. By forcing regular turnover, the Constitution restricts executive overreach. However, placing a strict time limit on a single individual creates a vulnerability if that leader suddenly disappears. Initially, the backup plan for the presidency was deeply flawed. Early in U.S. history, the president and vice president were elected separately, meaning they could belong to opposing political parties, creating internal chaos. Even when that was fixed, the vice presidency spent decades as a ceremonial role. Vice presidents were largely sidelined, sent off to attend state funerals and take friendly tours of foreign capitals. Today, the position looks drastically different. Modern vice presidents are critical policy advisors, regularly stepping in to spearhead complex legislative initiatives, like when President Obama tasked Vice President Joe Biden with drafting new domestic legislation. They are also integrated into the highest levels of global military strategy, serving as active, participating members of the National Security Council. This deep involvement ensures the vice president is an active co-pilot, ready to steer the executive branch at a moment's notice. Despite this modern expansion, the Constitution assigns the vice president exactly 3 formal duties. First, they oversee the Senate, holding the power to cast a deciding vote whenever legislation ends in a tie. Second, and critical to national stability, they carry a heavy burden under the 25th Amendment. The vice president must help the cabinet decide if a sitting president is medically or mentally unable to carry out the duties of the office.
Finally, their ultimate constitutional duty. If the sitting president dies, resigns, or is impeached, the vice president immediately absorbs the full power and title of the presidency. These 3 specific mandates establish the vice president as the nation's primary operational failsafe, ready to act if the executive chain breaks. The presidency is a statistically dangerous job. 8 times in American history, the sitting executive has died while holding office. But vacancy isn't the hardest problem to solve. When President James Garfield was shot in 1881, he survived for 80 agonizing days. During that entire stretch, he was unable to serve, yet the Constitution had no clear mechanism for anyone to legally take over his duties. This ambiguity caused recurring crises. When Woodrow Wilson suffered a severe stroke, and later when Dwight D. Eisenhower was hospitalized with a heart attack, executive power effectively hung in legal limbo for weeks or months at a time. To fix this constitutional blind spot, Congress passed the 25th Amendment in 1967. It created a legal mechanism for a disabled president to temporarily hand over power, or, if they refuse, for the vice president and cabinet to take it. Biological vulnerability forced the United States to write strict medical contingency plans directly into the highest law of the land. Those new constitutional protocols didn't sit untested for long.
In the early 1970s, a chain reaction of events stressed the 25th Amendment to its limits. It started in 1973 when Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned. Relying on the 25th Amendment's vacancy rules, President Richard Nixon nominated Gerald Ford to be the new vice president, which Congress approved. Less than a year later, the Watergate scandal forced Nixon's own resignation. Following the line of succession, Gerald Ford was immediately elevated to the presidency. With the vice presidency now empty again, Ford utilized the exact same constitutional mechanism to nominate Nelson Rockefeller to fill the vacant slot. The fail-safe system executed perfectly, resulting in the only time in United States history that the country was led by a president and a vice president who had never been elected to either office by the public. But what happens if the crisis is immediate and total? What happens to the country if both the president and the vice president are incapacitated simultaneously? To prevent a complete collapse of the executive branch in a catastrophic scenario, the government relies on the Succession Act of 1947. This organizational chart maps a definitive chain of command. If the top two seats are empty, power falls directly to the Speaker of the House. If the Speaker is unavailable, it moves down to the President pro tempore of the Senate. If the legislative leaders are also gone, the line of succession plunges deep into the executive branch itself. It flows down through the heads of the President's cabinet, starting with the Secretary of State, and continues sequentially through the departments based on the exact year Congress created them. This cascading line of command functions as a redundant architecture for the executive branch, ensuring the republic remains governed through an unbroken chain of authority.